Ablat Gemara. We are up to Daf Chav Beis Amud Aleph, and it's the middle of a sugya. And the question that we have here is, when a husband annuls the neder of his wife, is it retrospective or is it just megas gayas from now on? We know that a chacham, when they're matir and neder, they're matir and bafreya, because a chacham, how does a chacham matir and neder? That you have to have charata. That was entire neder was based on an error, it was calculated or whatever it was. But when it comes to a husband annulling the neder of his wife, it's not a case of charata, and therefore it's the question is, maybe it's different. It's only from now on. So we haven't resolved it yet. We had exactly the same discussion in Gemara Nadarim, and here we bring a couple of different proofs. But Chav Beis on all of the very top of the page. Tashma, come in here. We learned Isha Shenodra ben Nazir. This is actually taken from Nadarim as well. A woman who made a neder to become a Nazir, and then Vitit Nitmas, she became Tameh. Now, when you become Tameh, generally speaking, you have to bring 3 kabbanas, 2 birds, a chatas, and an oila, and then you bring a carbon ashram, a guilt offering, and then you start counting all over again. But over here, so she made her neder to become a Nazir, became Tameh. Only after she became Tameh did her husband annul her neder. So that's what happens now. But she brings her kabbanas, doesn't she? Mevia chatas ha'oif, ve'ena mevias oilas ha'oif. She only brings the bird that's a carbon chatas, but she does not bring the bird that is an oila. Now the obvious question is going to be, if the husband is only annulling the neder for the future, then at the time when she became Tameh, she was a proper nazir. So she should really be bringing all the kabbanas. So you want to ask a question. The guys, if you tell me husband only annuls it for the future, then taisi nami oila sa'oif. She should not only bring the carbon chatas, the bird chatas, she should bring the bird oila. Now, what about the bird ashram? The Gemara doesn't mention it. Tosha says it's automatically included. The Gemara is asking, basically, you should bring all kabbanas. Rashi, however, says that a carbon ashram you don't bring unless you're going to start counting the nazirs all over again. And in this case, she definitely is not going to start counting nazirs all over again because the husband annuls it in the future. So ashram is out of the question. The only question is, you bring an oilas ha'oif, bring the chatas ha'oif, bring the bird, the sin offering as well. So doesn't that prove that the neder must be that you're completely unraveling the naziris, and that's why she does not bring the carbon oilas ha'oif? So the obvious question Mar asks is the elamai. So what are you trying to prove from here? That meyakar akka. So you're proving from here that it's conclusive that actually the husband, when he knows the neder, it's retrospective. So let me ask you a question. If so, why bring an oilas ha'oif as well? Says the Gemara. Why are you telling me she does not bring an oilas ha'oif, nor should she bring the chatas ha'oif? Why? Because there was no nazir in the first place, according to you. Says the Gemara, hachinami. You're right, but v'hamani Rabbi Lezer HaKapari. This is the Rabbi Lezer HaKappa, which we already discussed a few times, and he is going to say, you're right. There's no nazir here, and therefore she does not bring the oilas ha'oif, but a chatas ha'oif she does bring. Now, why does she bring a chatas ha'oif? The Tanya we learned, Rabbi Lezer HaKappa, why does it say when a person who's a nazir becomes tamei, they bring a carbon? It says ma'ashachata ala nefesh, because he committed a sin. What do you mean he committed a sin on himself? The fact that you deprived yourself from drinking wine, which is something that's permitted, is a sin. Nikra is considered a sin. From here we learn out that generally a person shouldn't fast, because if all you denied yourself was drinking wine, and yet Nikra Chayte would call you a sinner. If you fast and you don't need anything, surely you consider a sinner. Bottom line is, so why does she bring a chatas ha'oif? An ordinary nazir does not bring a chatas ha'oif. An ordinary nazir who did not become tamei does not bring a chatas ha'oif, because the mitzvah of becoming a nazir is greater than the small aveda of denying yourself drinking wine. But in this case over here, even though she's turned out to be, she's no longer nazir. So an ordinary person who accepts naziris, becomes tamei, and then goes to chacham and is a mata neder, brings no kabbanas, because we're never nazir in the first place. Over here, even though the husband knows the neder, and we're saying that you're unraveling it, nevertheless, the fact is, we're not saying there was a mistake here. It was a proper naziris, but the husband has the ability to undermine it and retrospectively. Therefore, a little bit of Veda happened, and that's why she brings a karma chatas. But an ordinary nazir, as well, another reason is when it comes to an animal chatas, we never bring an animal chatas unless it's a serious sin. A bird chatas, even if it's doubtful what the situation is, you still bring it. So therefore, she brings it. So right now, the Gemara seems to prove from this brayse here that the husband is oiker milamafreya. Says the Gemara, bring another brayse. Tashma coming here. The time we learned behead you clearly. Isha should not be nazir. We just learned in the Mishnah in the previous blot. If a woman makes a neder to be a nazir, a lady friend of hers heard it. But she says, "Ba'ani," and me too. And afterwards, the husband, the first one came along, and completely annulled that neder. He mutered, so the first wife, she is now permitted drinking wine. But the friend who took upon herself nazir is asa. Why is she asa? If you're telling me that the husband annulled it retrospectively, then and this other one said, and me too what? The first one never became a nazir. But if you learn that she was a nazir until that moment that the husband annulled it, then the second woman who accepted upon herself naziris prior to the husband annulling it is a proper acceptance, is a proper naziris. So from here we prove shmamin abal megas guys. It goes for the future. And Tosha says it's very odd that the previous brisa proved that we're oiker lafreya, that the neder never happened, and this brisa proves that the neder is megas guys, that the husband annuls only the future. Anyway, the Gemara then continues the right. So Rav Shimon says, "Im Omer Allah." If the second woman, instead of saying "Mani" and "me too," says "Hareini k'maisach," I want to be exactly like you, then stay in mutaris. Not only when the husband knows the first wife, the second one is also permitted. Why? Because she clearly said, "I want to be like you, like your outcome." And since your outcome is that you're not a nazir, I'm not a nazir either. So according to the way I just explained to you, Rav Shimon is not even really arguing with Tanakama. He's just introducing another case. You said, "Va'ani," what the din is. I'm telling you, but if she used different words, Hareini k'maisef, it's a different outcome. I want to be exactly like her, completely including the outcome. However, others want to learn that he's actually arguing with the Tanakama and he's interpreting what she says, "Va'ani," me too. Me too means I want to turn out to be exactly like you, whatever your outcome is. Okay. So the Gemara concludes over here that a husband is megas guy. He's coming forward, annulling in the future. Says the Gemara, Mori Omar, the son of Mori says that now that you mentioned this, Bryce, we had an interesting discussion in Gemara in Adar, where we discussed in the beginning of Adar. When a person, let's say, the way you make a neder, there's two ways of making a neder. One is you say, this bread is forbidden to me. And the other one is called hatfasa. You say that this bread should be like this item here, whatever that item is. And if that item, let's say, it should be like this carbon. So what you're doing is you're transferring the kedusha of the carbon to this item, and you're making this item us. So the Baruch an interesting question. You're putting a piece of bread there on the table next to carbon shlamim. Now, the carbon shlamim is prior to sprinkling the blood, you're not allowed to have any benefit from it. Post sprinkling the blood, then the owners can eat from it, except there are certain limitations, certain restrictions. You can only eat for 2 days and 1 night, only within the environs of Yerushalayim. So the question is, when you place this piece of bread next to the carbon shlamim, what are you saying? You're saying, I want it to be like the shlamim, the way it was originally prior to the sprinkling of the blood, and therefore I want the bread to be totally forbidden? Or am I saying that the bread should be like the shlamim after the sprinkling of blood, which means that maybe it should be permitted? So, and what does that do with our arguments? We are going to relate it back to the Mishnah right here, where the second person said, and me too. Says the Gemara. This in fact is exactly what Rabbi Chama asked. What's the story there? The boy Rabbi Chama asked an interesting question. He said that this piece of bread should be like the meat of a carbon shlam of an animal. Mao, what is the law? Do we say kimatfis inish be karamatfis? Do we say that you mean essentially that when you initially started that shlamim, it was forbidden to everybody until you sprinkle the blood? So that's what you're saying now. This bread should be like that. Or maybe literally means when something is cold. Something starts out hot, but eventually over time it becomes cold. So maybe when you were saying over here that it should be like a thing, you meant betzinner, you meant it should be like the shlamim after the sprinkle goes, which means that it should be permitted. So that's the question. And the same thing over here. That this woman over here, when she said, I want to be a Nazir like her, she means the beginning when the first woman initially said, I'll be a Nazir. The second woman says that me too. Means that she wants to be like the first woman from the beginning, or she wants the whole package the way it is in the outcome. And the outcome is the first woman is permitted because the husband knows it, so to the second woman. And yet the Brisa says, the Brisa says that the first woman is permitted, the second woman is asa. So that shows that he goes after the beginning. Says the Gemara, what are you comparing the two? Says the Gemara, Midami, how can you compare the case of Shlamim to the case over here of the woman with a Nazir? Why not? Over here, if she says I want it to be like the outcome, what's the bottom line? She does not become a Nazir. So what was the point of the whole exercise? Why say I'll be like her when nothing happened? By a carbon, when you say the bread, there's two possibilities. Either it should be like before sprinkling the blood, which is basically forbidden to everybody, or it should be like after sprinkling the blood, and therefore there's still some restrictions on the bread, the way some of the Shayim learned. Either the bread will be forbidden for me after 2 days and 1 night, or I can only eat the bread within the environs of Yerushalayim. So I'm still doing something. The question is, which one did I mean? I'm still achieving something with my words. So you want me to, how can you compare? Hustle over the kid, no matter like I want to be like a meat of a carbon shlamim. After the blood is sprinkled, Motzi Achalei Bechut, you can eat it outside the base of Mikdash. Mikdash Kaddish still has a certain modicum of Kedusha that you have a little bit of time that you can eat it by, or with still a limited place where you can eat it only through Yerushalayim. I will hoch over here. If you think the Tzidika Mata, so you're going to learn that this woman, the second woman here, is when she said, I want to be like her, I wanted to be like her completely in the outcome. And what did she achieve? The husband annulled it, so therefore, why bother saying you want to be like her when it's nothing? You're not a Nazir, nothing happened. Why waste the words? Yeah, says the Gemara. So therefore, it has nothing to do with Chama. We cannot resolve Rabbi Chama's question from our Brisa here. However, Ikadamri, there's another version that says, Hainu the Rabbi Chama Vada. You're exactly right. It's exactly like Rabbi Chama, and therefore we can resolve the question of Rabbi Chama. That over here also. Just like over here, we say that with the second wife, the second woman is a Nazir because she follows the first woman's initial commitment to become a Nazir. The fact that the husband knows later is irrelevant. Same thing by the carbon. When you say I want the bread to be like a carbon shlamim, you meant prior to the sprinkling of the blood. So there's two opinions here. So you want further, what happens instead of saying me too, she used the following expression. Hareini Nazira, the second woman said, I will also be a Nazir. I will be a Nazir following you. But use the word ikvech, your footsteps. And as Pesach explains, there's two ways of understanding Akev. Akev sometimes means the beginning, and Pesach brings a pasuk that shows that it means the beginning, and sometimes Akev means the whole package, like Akev Hashashama B'Kayim, because you listen to everything that I said. So the word ikvech, again, does she mean whatever you said in the beginning? The second woman said, you said you'll be a Nazir, even though the husband annulled it later, doesn't matter. I accept this or not. Says the Gemara, or do we say I want the total package and the outcome as well? Amrullah, she said, in your footsteps, Mao. What did she mean by that? Did she mean I'll be exactly like you, completely including the outcome, and therefore, since you're not a Nazir, your husband annulled your Naziris, so too, I'm not a Nazir either. Or perhaps she meant the beginning, when you initially accepted to be a Nazir, and me too, is I'll be a Nazir. And therefore the second woman remains a Nazir. Toshma coming here, Isha, a woman should know to be Nazir. If a woman said, I'll be a Nazir. Shama Baila, her husband heard, but Oman, he said, Vani. The woman said, I'll be a Nazir. And the husband said, and me too. The husband cannot annul the wife's neder. You cannot annul the wife's neder. Now, if you're going to tell me, when he says, I'll be like you. And even though you didn't use the word Hareini V'ikra, or some of the Shayim say, we're talking about with use, or even when we learn the Gemara pashtus. The husband didn't use the word be'ikrach, but he's basically saying, I want to be exactly like you. He said, I'll be like you. Be'ikar kamata. You can tell me he goes after the beginning, which means that she was a Nazir in the beginning. So therefore, he should be a Nazir in the beginning as well. So why can't he annul his wife's neder? Because Mabda is late for let him annul the wife's neder, but like him today and accept his. In other words, if the whole problem is that once he annuls the wife's neder, and he says, I want to be, if you're going to learn that he's exactly like her, he knows her neder, his neder becomes null and void as well, and that's a problem. And that explains the Mishnah well, because a person cannot annul their own nedarim, and therefore that's why he cannot annul his wife's either, because he said, me too, he made his dependent on her, and if she is not a nazir, neither is he, so he's annulling his own neder. And that's a problem. That's why the Mishnah says he cannot annul it. But if you're telling me that when a person says, and me too, or be equal, it's the same thing. It means the beginning, I'll be like the way you started out. So what's the problem? He can annul her neder, but his neder will still remain. So why can't he annul her neder? So the Gemara, let him annul her neder, but like him today, and confirm his own. El Ashmam doesn't prove the Kula de Milsa Matris when he says that me too, he meant exactly in every respect, even your outcome. The Hilcha, therefore, therefore he cannot annul his wife's neder. He cannot annul his wife's neder, because if he knows his wife's neder, he'll be like her. His own neder will be annulled, and you cannot annul your own neder. So we see from here that it actually goes the entire package deal rather than just the beginning. And therefore, Ha'isha, this second woman, the Amra, she says, I will be like you. It means not just the beginning, your original question, but rather I'll be exactly like you, including your outcome. She'll be permitted as well. So no, it doesn't prove anything one way or another, because as we said a few days ago, that the pshat in the Mishnah is not because if he annuls her neder, his neder becomes null. The problem is he's annulling his own neder. Different problem altogether. Even if his neder remains, he cannot annul her neder, because the moment he said ani and me too, what he's really doing is confirming her commitment. And once you confirm a commitment, you cannot backtrack. You cannot retract that. So maybe I can say that the husband, when he says I'll be like her, meant the beginning. So why can't he annul her neder? Because his neder still remains. So let him annul hers. Over here, he said ani and me too, as if he says as if he's saying I confirm your commitment, you're a nazir, and therefore I'll be a nazir. And therefore, if he, the only remedy he has is he can go to a rav, or he can go to three people and withdraw and retract his confirmation, and then he can go ahead and annul. And the Torah laughs, it's not going to shame him whether he only can do it, only can do all this with the same day that he heard the original neder, and he confirmed it, and then he retracted, and then he can he retracted his confirmation, then he can annul it, or even a month later, the day that he decides to be mataneder, that day he has that entire day to go ahead and to annul. Okay, the Mishnah then finishes, he says, I'll be a nazir and you. The way we understand the Mishnah right now, he's making a statement, I'll be a nazir and you. And we interpret it as if to say that, and she is dependent on him, but he's not dependent on her. So he can annul her neder, but his neder still remains. So he said, Hareni nazir v'at, I'll be a nazir and you too. But Amr, and she answers Amen. Then Mayfid Eshallah, he can annul her neder because she's dependent on him, so he can annul it. But for his neder still remains, because just because her neder is annulled doesn't affect his at all, because he's the one initiated. So when I'll ask a question from Abraisa, there clearly says, Hareni nazir v'at. He says to his wife, I'll be a nazir and you too. But Amr, if she says Amen, yes, then Shneim Asurin, and they both become a nazir. But if not, Shneim Mutarim. If not, then since her neder does not go ahead, it's like annulled, so too his is annulled, as if his depends on his. Because his neder dependent on hers. So the way some of the Shayim learn, that's the question. First, you tell me that in our Mishnah seems that his Naziris is not dependent on her, using those words, Hareni Nazir Ba'at. But the Braisa seems to say that his Naziris is also dependent on her, like as if to say we both can do it together. And therefore, if she doesn't say yes, then his Naziris falls apart. That's how some of the Shayim learn. Rav Yehuda says, to me, you're right. You have to change the words of the Brisa. Say, Meifir Eshalavish Laikim. You're right. He is not dependent on her. So therefore, her Naziris is nullified, but not his. But Abaye says you misunderstood the Mishnah. I feel to him again to the Brisa, say exactly what the Brisa says. If you're going to Amala, he said, Hareini Nazir At. He says, I and you together will be the Nazir. So he made himself dependent on her. We'll do it if we do it together. He's saying that my Naziris depends on your Naziris. If she refuses to continue with it, so too his Naziris falls to the side. So the Brisa makes sense. What about our Mishnah? Umasnisin, our Mishnah could go into Amala. He said to her, Hareini Nazir, I'll be a Nazir. And the question, and then he turns to her, and what do you think? What would you like to do? So in this case, clearly his Naziris is not dependent on hers because he has no idea whether she'll accept or not. Therefore, even if she accepts, he can annul it because his Naziris is not dependent on hers, but his Naziris remains on. That's today's Gemara. Tomorrow's Gemara is a little bit of a break from all the difficult sugyas we had in Masechet Nazir. A little bit of a breather. Continue tomorrow.